In this video, I want to give you an example of some more of Marx's conflict theory. We left off our last class discussing Marx and his critique of capitalism. And I left you all with this question: what is done with the surplus money, surplus revenue, the profit that's generated with capitalism? In a system where the goal is to make money for money's sake, and capitalists are exploiting or robbing the working people of profits, what's done with all the extra money? We'll explore the answer to this question by looking at a theory that comes out of a book and a series of articles that led up to the book called Urban Fortunes. Urban Fortunes is a book published in 1987 by sociologist John Logan and Harvey Molotch. And this is not a 100% take on or adoption of Marxist theories, but it is a variation of a Marxist type of framework. The theory that they present in this book is called place stratification. And basically, this book comes down to this idea that Americans are divided on a lot of things. But one thing that all Americans support, regardless of politics and other forms of social grouping, is economic growth. We want growth for growth's sake and development for development's sake. This could be economic growth in general, and specifically, they talk about urban growth or place development. They advance this idea that a group of people called place entrepreneurs manipulate the economic and political systems for their private profit. This causes places to develop unequally. So it creates conflict between everyday Americans living in different cities or different neighborhoods, but it also pits the capitalists against each other in an eternal struggle. According to conflict theorists, urban development results from two internal contradictions of capitalism, what Marx calls internal contradictions. The first one is overaccumulation, and the second one is class struggle, or the classic kind of Marxist idea of class struggle. Overaccumulation is the idea that under capitalism, we generate more surplus, more money, more profit than we can ever use to reinvest into the business, more surplus than we can use to buy commodities. And one place that wealthy people put this surplus is into the built environment in the form of urban development projects. The second internal contradiction of capitalism, what conflict theorists refer to as class struggle, is the idea that capitalists, the wealthy class, and the workers are pitted against each other in a struggle for use and exchange values. Now, place is an interesting commodity: land, cities, neighborhoods, houses. Place is an interesting commodity. This framework argues that it's a commodity, just like a table is a commodity, or a cell phone or a car is a commodity. But place is unique because, for a couple reasons. One, it cannot easily be moved, right? Once you invest in a place, once you build a bridge, let's say, you can't just decide to move that bridge to a better location. Place is also unique as a commodity because it directly influences our life chances. Where you live determines where you go to school, where you might be able to find work, who you can encounter and network with, etc. So our houses are not just places that we live in. Think of them in this framework as commodities that are traded on the market, it's a both and situation. They're both places that we live in, and they are commodities on the market. And this brings me to the point about use values and exchange values. So when it comes to houses, let's just use a house as an example. There are both use values and exchange values. Use values are generally associated with people who buy the house, homeowners. Exchange value is generally associated with sellers. And what I mean by that is when you purchase a house, typically you want to use that house. You want to live in it. You want to raise your family in that house. You want to create a garden. But houses are also a type of investment strategy, right? When you buy a house, you hope that the equity or the value of your house increases. One day you may be able to cash out that house. You might be able to sell it and take that cash and buy a bigger house. You may be able to refinance it or borrow against the value of the house to pay or finance your children's college education, for example. So houses have use value. We use them as commodities, right? They have a functional purpose, but then they also have what's called exchange value, meaning they can be exchanged on the market. Houses are typically, for a long time in recent American history, have been the basis of lifetime wealth management strategies. Dog barking again. Now, Logan and Molotch argue that when cities grow and develop, it disproportionately benefits people who have vested interest in the exchange values of houses, of places as commodities. And even though a homeowner can sell their house and benefit from the sale of that house, they're talking about a larger scale phenomenon where entire cities, entire sections of cities develop, and the people who benefit the most are not the people using that new place, but the people who have invested in the development project. And let's take the Seaport in Boston, for example. If you go to Seaport, there's restaurants, there's a kind of nice promenade that you can walk, there's sights to see, but there's a ton of money, billions of dollars invested in being, not being just invested in building the Seaport. And the reason Seaport was developed was not just so the average person in Boston and the tourist to Boston can enjoy themselves, right? It was developed as a part of a wealth investment strategy, right? It was developed with the idea that more money could be generated than what was put into it. So all of the condos and the high rises being raised in Seaport, right? The idea is that they will be able to flip those as high luxury apartments, right? And they will be able to generate a ton of revenue from that development project. And the people that benefit from that development are not the users, are not the average tourists and pedestrians and visitors to the area, but are the investors, or are what Logan and Molotch call the place entrepreneurs. So this is kind of an oversimplified version of their model, but it goes something like this. There are people that have financial interest in a particular place, and through collective action with other business people, they form an allegiance of interlocking pro-growth associations and governmental units. This is that political economic collaboration. This collective of place entrepreneurs creates conditions that will intensify future land use in an area. And a common example of this, so I told you all that I'm from Cleveland, and I know this example from the Cleveland area, but the Cavaliers, who's Cleveland's NBA team, basketball team, they wanted to renovate their stadium. Stadium renovations cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they ended up forming a partnership with the local city council that offered, and they negotiated a deal where the Cavs would invest in this development project, and the city of Cleveland would give them this huge tax abatement, something like a 10-year tax abatement. Now, this ended up being a controversial agreement because no one in the city of Cleveland got to vote on this. The argument that the city council made was that everyone in Cleveland, everyone who's a fan of the Cavaliers, everyone who travels to the region will benefit from this new development. But when you look at the financials of it, the taxpayers of Cleveland were going to end up footing the bill for this development project. And if you look at the distribution of who actually is able to attend NBA games, it's not the average resident in Cleveland, right? It skews a little bit to the wealthy. So it's this idea that all of us like the idea of new growth and new development, a new stadium, a new aquarium, a new waterfront park. It looks good in our city. It makes us feel good to use it. But the true value in that is in the investment, is in the exchange value. And that is a surplus that, again, is going to be exploited and stolen or kept by the wealthy. And so this is a hypothetical example of a pro-growth association. This is my illustration of what it might look like. So people that have a vested interest in seeing land develop might include realty companies in the red, in the blue, local politicians, in the purple, land developers or construction companies, the people that will actually excavate the land, that will actually bring in the supplies, do the construction. And then you have just purely financial interest, investors and banks who might be brought into this conversation. Now, I mentioned how, excuse me, place entrepreneurs will exploit an area for their own benefit, pitting the place entrepreneurs, the wealthy place entrepreneurs against the average residents of an area. In the case of Cleveland, right, pitting the politicians and the owners of the Cavaliers against the average resident of Cleveland. But this type of action is contradictory, according to conflict theorists, because it also pits places against each other. And here, I'll give you some more, again, simplified illustrations that show this point. So each place has a particular political or economic standing vis-a-vis other places that affect the quality of life and opportunities available to people who live within those boundaries. Because people who live in an area gain when their city or their neighborhood defeats the competition, growth is promoted as good. There was this, a couple years ago, Amazon was trying to figure out where they were going to build their new headquarters. And they got a lot of cities around America to bid to say, hey, we're the best city for Amazon. And in that bid, a lot of average New Yorkers, average Bostonians, average Clevelanders began to say, hey, yeah, we want Amazon here too. And again, growth is something that everyone supports. But in this example on the slide here, you have a hypothetical city with a downtown surrounded by two neighborhoods. And those colored blocks represent the size of the growth coalitions. And just in a very simplified quantitative kind of ranking, can you imagine which neighborhood would be able to outbid the other neighborhoods for a new development project? In this example, it's pretty clear that downtown has the largest growth coalition. They probably have philanthropists and financial interests and land developers and museums and all of the things needed to intensify land use, intensify development, compared to neighborhood B or A, which quantitatively just don't have the same buying power. So if you live in this city, in this hypothetical city, and there's a new development project, chances are it's going to happen in downtown at quicker rates than it will happen in neighborhood A or neighborhood B. Let's think about this using some neighborhoods of Boston: South Boston, West Roxbury, Cambridge, and Chelsea, just as an example. In this example, we can see that, again, just quantitatively, Cambridge and South Boston have larger growth coalitions than West Roxbury and Chelsea. Likely, these vested interests in these areas are going to encourage growth, are going to encourage development, are going to encourage investment in their area. So if Cambridge is encouraging investment and development and has the resources to do it, West Roxbury is not guaranteed to get that same amount of development. The way capitalism works, the way competition under capitalism works, is it's also going to pit these neighborhoods against each other. We can also think about where development might go at a metropolitan level, right? Within a metropolitan area, neighborhoods might be pitted against each other, and we'll see one side of town do really well and one side of town sort of begin to decline. But even metro by metro, city by city, we can see differences where an NBA team is going to locate, right? Where a new museum is going to locate, where new luxury condos can be located. In this example with Chicago, Virginia Beach, Cleveland, and Boston, we can see that Chicago and Boston have much more resources in terms of the size of their growth coalition, in terms of the amount of place entrepreneurs that are focused on using Chicago or Boston as an investment strategy. So it's not to say that a developer will never choose Cleveland over Boston, but it just means that Boston can incentivize growth, can encourage investment because they have the resources and the people in the wealthy kind of individuals or entrepreneurs or the wealthy growth coalition that will help facilitate that change and that development. So not only are average people kind of in competition with wealthy people, the average homeowner that just wants to buy a house to raise their family and find a good school, right, all of a sudden finds their neighborhood begin to be divested as investors look to another side of town to build the new high school or to build the new library or to encourage the new development. But it's not just the working people of the world that are pitted against each other. It's also wealthy people. If you're wealthy in Cleveland, that doesn't mean that you're on the same level as someone who's wealthy in Boston or someone who's wealthy in Chicago. And so the way cities develop based on investment strategies in urban development really has a lot to do with the size of these growth coalitions. So that is Logan and Molotch's place stratification theory in a nutshell. And this theory is really good because it has, I think its main strength is that it pays attention to politics and economics. It doesn't just take urban growth and urban development as this sort of neutral process or this kind of inert process that just happens and we don't really know who to point to, or we can't figure out who the actors are. At the same time, one of the weaknesses, I think, of this framework is that it assumes that political and economic elites always will do, or political and economic actors will always do the bidding of elites. That political elites, economic elites, that celebrities, that the wealthy, the elite in our society are always on the same page and are always going to work kind of towards a strategy of being more wealthy instead of more philanthropic strategies, or that they won't ever reinvest in their own community. So there's sort of this assumption with this theory that it always works this way. And I think what they have done is presented some evidence that it often works this way. But just like any other theory, it could be true that we need some more evidence. We need some more research to figure out if what was working this way when this book was published in '87 continues to operate the same way in our lives. Thank you for listening and hope you have a good week.